thank you everyone for attending, and welcome to this webinar on an introduction to applied technology ethics. So we're really excited about this collaboration with the DigiFed program, and we're going to tell you a bit about the DigiFed program in the webinar, as well as have an introduction to technology ethics and a panel discussion. So really excited about the content today, and I'll just kind of proceed by giving a bit of an introduction to myself and to Digital Catapult. So my name is Nathan Coulson. I'm a senior technologist in responsible and ethical AI, and I work for Digital Catapult, which is a non-profit technology research organization in the UK. And we're one of Europe's digital innovation hubs, and is part of a network of digital innovation hubs that are participating in the DigiFed program. And Isabel, who I'll introduce next, will tell us about the DigiFed program. So I'm just going to take us through the agenda. So after this kind of brief introduction, I'm going to be handing over to Isabel to give an introduction to DigiFed, and then to Sam to talk about technology ethics, key concepts and approaches. And at each of those points, please do look at the Q&A box and pop any questions in there addressed to either Isabel or Sam, and we'll address them in the chat or potentially at the end of the that section of the talk if there's time. We'll then have a brief fireside chat with a couple of startups that were supported through Digital Catapult and DigiFed. So Datenberg and Flycom Technologies, they both received an ethics consultation and support on technology ethics. So we'll find out a bit more about their companies and also about what they got out of their ethics support. Then we'll hand over to my colleague Cecilia, who will be chairing a panel discussion with Trish, Mavis and Guy, who will introduce themselves from the startup world, but also from with expertise in technology ethics, law, regulation, and different domains like healthcare. So that'll be a really interesting discussion. And then we'll wrap it up towards 11 o'clock UK time. So with that, I'm going to welcome Isabel to turn on her camera and mic, and hand over to her to give an introduction to DigiFed.
Hello, welcome everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
No? Yeah? Okay. Hello, I'm really proud to be there and introduce you DigiFed program. So I'm coordinator of this project, but I'm working at CEOALITI, which is a research institute, a governmental research institute in France, in the Alps, dedicated to microelectronics, and I'm myself in a cybersecurity lab. Next, please. The goal here now is to make a brief introduction about DigiFed. DigiFed is a H2020 project, a cascade funding type of project, which is supporting. Okay, sorry, I have a little problem on my computer. The idea is really to foster industry and especially SMEs to digitize their products and services. So we are focusing on cyber physical system, embedded system. So any digital application when it talks with the physical world and hardware globally, if I want to be sure. Next slide, please. So who we are 12 partners. I will not read it, but you see quite covering well Europe. We have different types of partners. Some are more technology partners, both from university, research and technology organization and industrial, big industrial like ST or AVL. And we are also have digital innovation hubs like Digital Catapult or Minalogic, who are digital innovation hubs, are really interface for companies to address any type of digitalization question and find the good stakeholders. So it's really a networking place for digital. We are a 3-year project. We are in the last year, €8 million project. We have been supporting through the cascade funding more than 120 SMEs with almost €4 million transferred to support project with SMEs. But we also have support with our partner resource up to €1 million from the resource of the partner supporting the SMEs. Next, please. So here, well, how do we support companies? We have 3 different innovation pathways to support SMEs from European countries. The main one, which is well known from the from previous project from the Smart Anywhere, Smart Anything initiative. It's application experiment. So typically it's a small 1-year project where we can support financially through the cascade funding an SME up to 50K. And we add the support of a technology partner from the consortium to develop a prototype, including cyber physical systems. And we also support what we call twin project, where we can support 2 SMEs, each of receiving 50K. And then we also propose a DigiFed innovation management program to help them also to address the go-to-market of their product. We have been launching 3 open calls. We don't have any more open calls, and we are financing 44 projects and almost 70 companies. We also have other innovation pathway, but I will not describe it too much. Another one interesting, it's almost like an application experiment, so it is the digital challenge, but it's not the goal of the project. The challenge of the project is proposed by a large enterprise, a European enterprise, and the idea is really to build a value chain. So the open call were open to European SMEs to who wants to propose a solution to this digital challenge from the digital challenge owner. So we have been running 3 open calls here, and 3 projects are now launched to solve these digital challenges with 3 SMEs from Europe. Then the generic experiment community, it's a really different model where we are building a community of SMEs, a European community of SMEs around the technical topics, for example, cybersecurity. I am running one generic experiment, and we are discussing with SMEs to understand their needs around these cybersecurity needs, and try to solve it and to increase the knowledge about the cybersecurity in my case. So we are working in workshops and demonstration and interaction, regular interaction with the community. And here we have been launching 4 different generic experiments. You can go on our website if you want to learn more about it. And it concerns almost 50 SMEs. Everything is on our website. Especially if you want to know more about our application experiment, we have a portfolio where you can see all the small projects we have been supporting. Next slide, please. So why today the approach about the DIH? I don't know if everyone is aware about DIH. The DIH is really, our goal here is to build a network of digital innovation hubs. And digital innovation hubs, I have told you, is a kind of network ecosystem to help any companies, not only SMEs, to enter the digitalization. So to find, if you need to find a partner, if you need to find a technology, if you need to find a research center, or even market access, innovation management, we can support, this DIH can support you. And here in DigiFed, our goal is to enhance the collaboration between existing European DIH. And really it's to engage different EU DIH or European DIH to work together to identify best practice, export service from one DIH to another. And for example, this ethical webinar from Digital Catapult DIH is the example of such service that we would like to export in other DIH. So this is really the goal of what we are doing, to make a network of European DIHs. Next slide, please. So now, why are we supporting this webinar proposed by Digital Catapult? Inside DIA, DigiFed, and for each project, of course, ethics has been an important question, especially when we are talking about data and digital, but also for some projects, we have some health applications. So of course, like every H2020 project, we deal with ethics with the classical questionnaires. So just checking that you're compliant with GDPR, you are, well, the very classical list. We do believe ethics is much more than that, okay? And if we really want to mitigate the risk and enhance the benefits of advanced technology, has a strong impact, both commercial but on the society, we need to have a much more proactive approach of the ethics. And it's not so easy to handle this, especially when you're an SME. So inside DigiFed, we will not be able to offer to all the SMEs to access to this program for free, like it was done for the two companies you will be presented today. But the goal is more to inform all the network of SMEs and DIH, which I guess are participating today, what can be such ethical service, how you can collect and to collect what is your interest and needs in terms of such service that you could be proposed by the European DIH. So I really hope that this webinar will help us to understand more what is needed from the SMEs on this. So thanks a lot to Digital Catapult to organize this webinar. And then I leave the floor to the next speaker. If you have any question, of course, I'm open to answer.
Thank you very much, Isabel. And if you have any questions about DigiFed or any of those initiatives, please pop them in the Q&A box. And so for now, Isabel, can ask you to go off camera and mic, and I can welcome Sam to the floor to kind of introduce herself, and I'll stop sharing my slides as well. Hi, Sam.
Thank you, Nathan. I'll just wait for you to stop sharing our slides, but in the meantime, I'll introduce myself. My name is Sam Brown. I'm the co-founder of Consequential, which is a social innovation practice that works across the tech sector to help people build businesses and products in more responsible and resilient ways. And I'm also on the ethics advisory committee at the Digital Catapult. Can everybody see my screen now?
Yeah, we can see it. Thanks, Sam.
Brilliant. So a lot of people, when they hear about ethics, think about philosophy, they think about GDPR and data protection and other types of legal requirements, or they think about not doing some very obviously terrible things like killing babies. But in fact, tech ethics is a business discipline, and it's one of the most useful business disciplines for you to engage with early on in your business. When you're focused on developing the best product in the world, it can be really easy to forget to ask yourself about whether or not it's also the best product for the world. Applied tech ethics in a business context ask you to build 3 critical business capabilities that can help you to thrive in uncertainty. And that's having everybody in your organization be able to take a 360-degree view of your business, building a culture of critical questioning, and being open and accountable for the responsibility that you're willing and able to take for your business decisions. Because a tech product that is produced by a business is not neutral. It's made by people. It's made through the values and the cultures of a business, through its goals and its strategies and its policies and its practices. And it's these things that determine the shape of technology that gets put into the world and what impact that's going to have on its stakeholders. So just for a bit of an example, if Facebook had been designed by a 40-year-old woman in Argentina, instead of a 20-year-old man in the US, it would probably look quite fundamentally different. It would value in different things, and it would center different things. So tech ethics is one of the only business disciplines that takes a continuous 360-degree view of your business, because it's everything about your business that shapes your tech product. And it's one of the only disciplines that does this. It involves looking at every place in your business where decisions about your technology products are being made. And to do this is business critical in an increasingly complex environment, which is why applied tech ethics isn't an intellectual exercise, it's not a tick box exercise, and it's not only about GDPR or about other types of well-known technology consequences, but rather it's actually a lens and a cross-cutting approach to your business. Because tech ethics looks at traditional business problems with this lens, a tech ethics approach to solving business problems is always going to be different than any other traditional business discipline. And that's an incredible opportunity. And it's why tech ethics is about so much more than harm reduction. It's also about innovation, approaching the same business problems that every startup has, but with a new lens allows you to start to innovate in how you make your technology. At Consequential, we often say that innovation actually happens in the seemingly boring parts of your business, but by zooming in on them and approaching them differently, you can really change what starts to come out. So by focusing on all of those places where you make decisions, you start to create new things in new ways. And ethics is really about systemic thinking. So while design thinking can solve some very specific problems, looking at things systemically allows you to start to make different things that might last a bit longer or have a better product market fit. You can create products that really address the roots of the problems that you want to solve. You can build a business where everybody is proud to work, and you can grow and scale in ways that are going to have a positive impact for the places that you operate. In order to practice tech ethics in your organization, though, you need to start to create a culture and teams who can critically question not only what you do, but how you're doing it in healthy ways. You need a diverse workforce and networks of people involved in your business who have different perspectives and understand your customers and your market from different angles. And you need to have a direction and a strategy and the policies and practices in place that support and empower teams to engage in foresight and to ask the questions that need to be asked about what it is you're creating. What that can look like often is translating your vision and your values, or the dream that you have for what your business could be, into lived reality. So, and if you look at the bottom of this iceberg, you have the dream, so your vision and your values and an intention of how it is that you want to be ethical or how you don't want to kill babies. But that needs to be translated into how you plan to execute on that direction and on that dream. So as you set your goals and objectives, as you design your organizational structure that will start to execute on them, you have to think about what kind of ethical behaviors and decisions do these structures incentivize. But the real challenge is how to make your intentions and your values a lived experience inside of your business. And that's where practices and policies come in. As you can see, they're above the waterline on the iceberg, and that's because they are the place where people most tangibly experience your business and its values. They tend to be the most overlooked area of your business, but by intentionally designing your practices and policies in ways that show what you care about, that will show up in your product, and having that consistency across your entire business about your direction and about what you care about and how it is that you want to execute on that is really going to help you to operate quickly. It's going to help you be far more efficient and stand out from the competition. So one of the most important things for your business practices to do is to support critical questioning. So critical questioning is not about slowing down development, which is also often a critique of ethics, but rather it's about inserting healthy friction with the goal of creating the best possible product. So as you start to build your product, having spaces where you can allow your teams to ask questions about what it's going to do and what it will impact, what type of impact it will have on different types of stakeholders is. So as I was saying, critical questioning is about inserting healthy friction into the design of your product. And friction in design used to be seen as the enemy, but time has shown that it can actually be the best thing for everyone. So for example, while there was once this massive glorification of friction-free payments in fintech, many banks now purposefully design checks and friction into their money sending applications in order to combat fraud. And that's proven to have had a massive positive impact for their customers. So having teams that can think systemically and critically about what your business is, you need to be able to do that in order to find your best product market fit, to tell stories about your decisions, and to pitch yourself to industries and investors who are focused on due diligence. So continuously meeting due diligence standards makes your business far more dynamic, and it's an incredible advantage to be able to pass various due diligence standards at any given point, because it's built into the way that it's inherently built into the way that you operate. The other crucial question that tech ethics can help you ask is what responsibility you can take for the consequences of your technology, and how you can be accountable for more than your bottom line. It looks at how you can be inclusive in your innovation process and how you can involve people who are going to be impacted by your products in your decision making. And allowing all of this is going to make your business more resilient in times of uncertainty. So as the regulatory environment for AI and other emerging technologies changes rapidly, building an organization that is already practicing the spirit of the law and is better able to adapt to new legislation is also going to give you a competitive advantage in the market. So just to reiterate, applied tech ethics are a business discipline, more so than a philosophical or high-level theoretical conversation or intellectual exercise about ethics. And it's one of the most useful business disciplines for you to engage with early on in your business. So having people who can advise you on the different ethical lenses and decisions of your business, or can help you to build in the business critical capabilities you need, like helping your teams to learn how to take a 360-degree view of your business, learning how to build that culture of critical questioning that you need, that can help you create the best possible products, and helping you to be open and accountable for your decisions, which ultimately shows maturity to industry and investors, and helps them to trust you and trust your ability to make smart and savvy and informed commercial decisions further down the line. And that is why tech ethics are what you need. And if you aren't engaging with them already, then you certainly should. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. That was fascinating, and yeah, very kind of in line with the work we do at Digital Catapult, and it's very often it's the kind of misconceptions about ethics that I think Isabel also mentioned that we overcome first when we talk about ethics. People often talk about maybe just personal data, just GDPR, and just kind of complying with laws and regulations, which of course is the minimum that anyone would expect. And then the kind of world of applied ethics is everything that comes after that adds value to your business. So that was fantastic. Thank you. So we have a few minutes to address some questions. So if you'd like to pop a question into the Q&A box, I'd welcome you to do so now. For Sam, we have a question here from someone in the audience who asked, how do you prevent tech ethics leading to decision fatigue?
Well, I think when you're building a startup, you are inherently facing a million decisions a day. And tech ethics is not adding in new decisions. It's simply looking at all the decisions that you have to make a little bit more holistically. And it's just adding a few extra viewpoints on those decisions and considering if maybe a few more stakeholders than you traditionally would. So it's not necessarily going to add to decision fatigue so much as just help you to make more holistic decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've definitely seen that where potentially businesses are making implicit decisions all the time, but not realizing that that's what's happening. And then discipline like applied ethics can help them to realize that those are actually decisions they're making, even if they're not doing it explicitly, and can put them into a better position. So yeah, I think that's definitely very, very interesting. I don't see any further questions, but I think just on our side, it'd be good to ask about how you think it's what's the best way of, say, a startup, whether in Europe or the UK, to start thinking about these issues and start engaging with applied ethics, because there's a lot of resources out there. It can get kind of a bit confusing because there are many frameworks, for example. Do you have any advice about that?
I think my first bit of advice would probably be to reach out to ethics advisors, similar to the ones that are available at a Digital Catapult and in other places, in order to just help to streamline and give you the introduction that you might need to those different tools and processes, perhaps to help you audit in your organization where you should most focus on what to do. But I think my general advice would be twofold. The first is building on exactly what you said, Nathan. Every single decision that you are making at the start of your business is a building block that over time is kind of determining the ethical direction of your company, whether intentional or not. So it's not that you decide to engage in ethics or not. No matter what you are doing, you are inherently making ethical decisions, whether that's on purpose or not. And your technology is going to have consequences, whether you want it to or not. And so it's really about understanding that you can start to engage with that intentionally, and you can start to examine the ways that your decisions are being made and the ways that you're role modeling what your business cares about. Especially as a founder, everybody else in your business watches what you do and they watch how you make your decisions, and they take that on board. So making your decisions out loud and making it very clear about what factors you are weighing and what you value most in those decision makings is the best place to start.
Brilliant. Yeah, so it sounds like there are some elements of kind of coaching as well as learning a discipline for your business. That's really interesting. Well, I've got another question here from the audience. So the question is, in data intensive technology research, are there any special ethical considerations? So data intensive technology research, which is fairly broad. And so I'll hand that over, but I don't know if the person wanted to kind of add any more specifics about the kinds of data, but for now, just a lot of data.
Yes, of course. So you need to start looking at the whole data lifecycle of the technology products that you are creating. There's going to be ethical considerations and questions at each point in that lifecycle. So for example, when you're starting to collect your data from different data set or data sources, knowing where that data comes from, knowing what kind of consent was involved in collecting that data, understanding what types of assumptions or biases were made in those data sets, how inclusive they are based on where it is that you're looking to deploy. So a mass market product, you're going to need to be a lot more rigorous about how inclusive your data sets are than perhaps a B2B industry deployment product. Then when you start to build your models, you'll again need to pay quite a lot of attention to what types of assumptions you are making. And I think the World Economic Forum, in their AI ethics for boards toolkit, actually has some really, really comprehensive and incredibly useful resources there that kind of help you focus in on some of the key questions you should be asking when you start to build data models. But you'll hear always quite a lot about accountability, about transparency of the model, about accounting for biases, and those types of things. And then when you start to deploy it, I think making sure that you are testing, again, quite inclusively, and in testing it in environments and with stakeholders who are going to be impacted by what it is that you are doing, and ensuring that people who might be adversely affected have agency and have an ability to feed back to you what is happening and ways for you to action on that feedback. And for you to also really pay attention to how you communicate what the potential shortcomings of your early pilot or your MVP may be. I think one of the worst and most egregious things they have seen startups do with data is to go out to mass market pretending that they have a fully finished product when in fact it only works on maybe 10 to 15% of the population. It's much better to be clear and transparent about what the current limitations of your products are, and to be open with your roadmap and how you're going to start to address that over time, than to pretend otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. And we definitely see that the startups we work with, it's kind of, it can be quite obvious to investors or to especially in business to business operations, like savvy kind of customers, they will see through exaggerated startup claims. So yeah, I think there's hopefully becoming more of an acknowledgement of, okay, you need to be clear about the limitations, because you can't, you have to build trust that way. Otherwise, people won't believe your next claim. So yeah, that's really helpful. And thank you for answering those questions. I think we have a little bit more time if there's any final questions. So I'll just give the audience a chance to ask that. But what we'll kind of transition to next is talking to two startups who had an ethics consultation through Digital Catapult. And that's a good kind of example of, taking that first step of talking to experts in technology ethics and, looking at some of those blind spots and it's definitely not the end of the journey, but it's what we find is it's a good beginning. Because as you say, Sam, once they do that and kind of devote some time to looking at these questions, they're better equipped to think about the different tools and resources that they might need in the future. Thank you so much, Sam, for that presentation. And if there are any kind of further questions for Sam and indeed for Isabel, please pop them in the chat and we can answer them either online or offline. So thank you very much. Yeah, so I can invite Maximilian and Luca from Flycom and Datenberg Technologies to unmute and share their screen. So not share their screen, share their video. And I will share my screen. Hi, Luca. Hi, Maximilian. Thanks for joining us. So you've both been part of the DigiFed program, and Digital Catapult was the DIH that supported you or is supporting you at the moment. So thank you very much for coming. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of go to the next slide and then invite, I think, Maximilian and then Luca to introduce themselves and their business and product, and then we'll get on to a quick question about how you found the ethics consultation. So I'll just start with Maximilian.
So good morning, and thanks, Nathan, for the warm welcome. So I'm Maximilian. I'm from Datenberg. Datenberg means mountains of data in German, and that's what we are doing with our software. We help manufacturing companies analyze data and generate added value out of data, maybe for better understanding of the production process, predicting the quality, and this is where ethics come in. And yeah, we're located in Germany and active in diverse industries from cheese manufacturing over automotive and plastics industry. And Nathan, should I directly go in with the ethics consultation or first hand over to my colleague?
Sure. Yes. Actually, yeah. We'll get on to the question on ethics maybe together, because maybe you can also exchange some experiences. So just go on to Luca to give an introduction to himself and Flycom.
Okay. Thanks, Nathan. Thanks, Maximilian. Hi to everyone. My name is Luca Royce. I'm from Flycom Technologies, a company located in Slovenia. What we do basically is we are the leading provider of area and mobile remote sensing services. We mostly use LiDAR data and different imagery sensors that we install on our planes, helicopters, and drones. And then we scan the environment, and then we need to process the data. And this is really time consuming. It takes a lot of manual human efforts, and it is expensive and it's difficult to do. So that's why through the help of DigiFed, we're currently developing our AI enabled application called Fly, which automizes the data processing steps for any geospatial data that we acquire in order to scan the environment.
Brilliant. Thanks, Luca, and thanks, Maximilian. So I'll just kick off with a kind of quick question to both of you, and then we can get into a discussion maybe on some of those points you bring up. But maybe going back to Maximilian. So as part of the kind of support that you got through DigiFed, you had an ethics consultation. Can you tell us a bit about that and what you got out of it as a founder and as a business?
Sure. So to answer that, a little bit introduction about the use case we had to get a look on. It was about predict the quality of a production part, and then recommend to the operator, this part is good, this part is bad. If it's bad, you should measure the quality to better understand what's happening. And ethic-wise, what we then analyzed was what's important, like where can this technology be applied? Meaning, should it be applied to like a part, I don't know, of like a pencil? It's not safety critical. But if you apply it to braking cables in the car, what's happened when we do a wrong prediction, and yeah, what's happening then with the brake system, which is safety critical for the car. And this is where we took to get a look onto it, and who's responsible. Is it us? Is it the operator at the end, because we just give a recommendation? And these were like the touch points what we took a look in the ethics consultation together.
Thanks, Maximilian. And I think what's something just interesting to note before going on to Luca is that that's a situation where there's not necessarily any kind of personal data or kind of looking at looking at bias, for example, in the data set with regards to people. So I think it's something that is it's a set of issues that is less well kind of treated and talked about, but it's equally part of thinking about ethics. Thinking about responsibility within an organization, and also the kind of AI safety aspect as well.
Yeah, totally. I agree. Like, we really did not have the issue with personal data or GDPR data, related data, so really process data. But for sure, there were bias in there, because if it's like a new supplier comes, a new data set, and this is what makes it very interesting. But we really just took a look at the safety part and not at the ethics in terms of personal data.
Brilliant, thanks, Maximilian. And yeah, same question to you, Luca, in terms of the ethics consultation. What you thought about it, and what you and your co-founders kind of got out of the experience.
Yeah, it was really cool to have the ethics consultation. We already had some, internal talks about it, but it's also very nice if you can speak to some experts, because they maybe draw up some questions that we didn't really think about. So as I said before, we acquire vast amounts of geospatial data, and especially with LiDAR, you get a really nice representation of the environment. So for example, if we scan one country, you can get a complete 3D model of the country. And this is, in our use cases, this is every time it's used for good, for planning the new infrastructure, or any kinds of projects, for maybe for smart cities. But the ethics consultations, they basically said that we should think about how our technology could be used by some malicious actors if they, let's say, if they penetrate our system. So we had some talks about data security. So we already have some standards in place, like the ISO standard, but we will think about this a bit more in the future, and we need to be prepared, just to be aware of the scenarios. If something happens, what could be done, so just that we are prepared. So that's why they also suggested, besides focusing on the data security, that it would be beneficial maybe in the future, when Fly is fully developed, to maybe collaborate with some universities or any other actors in the industry, that we have to be open about what we do, and then we'll get some additional inputs on how this technology could be used. So in the end, I think it was really beneficial to us. It gave us some new stuff to think about, and yeah, I would recommend it to basically any startup.
Great, thank you, Luca. And yeah, so I guess just between the two of you, some of those issues that kind of were raised, do you think they are kind of applicable across those businesses? So, for example, like data security and the kind of misuse of the technology on Databerg side, and then maybe kind of maybe safety critical applications on Flycom as well. Do you see any kind of crossover of some of those issues?
Totally. Like when you read like papers about AI application in manufacturing sector, we'll usually see people trying to fine tune the models until the MSE is the best what they can get, but they don't have a look on the safety side and on the, because MSE is not the thing when it comes to safety and robustness, and totally should be applied to different industries, and having always in mind this robustness and safety of the predictions. Yeah, I see that totally. And also with the security side, what you just mentioned, I mean, the same for here. What happened when you maybe share a model between two companies, and there this all comes together at the end.
Yeah, but I basically agree with what Maximilian said, so I have nothing more to add.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's really great. I think really interesting. So we have a few minutes. So if there's a kind of direct questions that people want to drop into the Q&A for Maximilian and Luca, please do so in the next few minutes. And then I guess kind of continue on with a bit of a kind of follow-up question, which is around following the ethics consultation and maybe ongoing kind of thoughts about those issues. What do you think is some next steps that you're considering in terms of the kind of business processes, or how you're having maybe different conversations and with your team? Have you seen any kind of changes in that sense, even if it's from a small kind of intervention like a consultation? Is that something you've considered doing now, or are kind of intensifying what you've already been doing?
You want to go first this time?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, basically what we did is, because at the consultation it was just myself and my colleague Nate, but we basically communicated to the whole team what was discussed, and it was really interesting. But it basically it was a good thing because it reinforced our efforts of what should we be doing. So yeah, in the future we'll just focus. We're already focusing on it, but just to keep it in the back of your head for every decision that you make, that you basically you have all the ethics aspects in mind of what you do. So, yeah.
I would say quite similar to our end. What we also have in mind is when we give the customer the possibility to use a prediction model, that is really about kind of a traffic light system, what we now have in mind. Say, no, now the prediction is safe, know what it tell you, and now it's orange or red. And in this data space, it does not know, it will show you a value, but it does not know what it's really doing. And I guess that's the most important one. What's going on there is to give this feedback to the end user. Look, it shows you some numbers, but so what? It extrapolates.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, Massimiliano, about, I guess, as thinking about the interface and having aspects of human-centered design, and realizing, well, you could have all kinds of safeguards or transparency in your platform, but actually if it's doesn't take into account kind of who's using it and how they use it, and what kind of information they need at what granularity, then they might not use that information or that feature at all. So yeah, I think that's a really great point about the importance of designing for your user, and making sure these things are transparent in a way that is actually useful for whoever you're building something for. So yeah, that's great. And thank you both for those contributions. It's really been interesting to hear about the kind of effect of those consultations, and also kind of the way you're running your businesses already. I think it's fantastic. I think we're aware also with the Digital Catapult with DIH, there's a kind of almost like a bias sample, in that people who are already interested in ethics and responsible AI are maybe more likely to apply. So definitely kind of great kind of working with you both. So thank you very much, and I'd just like to invite the next session on. So if Maximilian, Luca, you could see you later, get be off camera and mic, and then I'll welcome my colleague Cecilia from our very beautiful Future Networks lab. and she'll be chairing the panel discussion. So over to you, Cecilia.
Hi, thanks so much, Nathan. Hi, everyone. My name's Cecilia. I'm the Responsible AI Manager at Digital Catapult. Really excited to have you here on what in the UK is a pretty blustery, rainy Thursday morning. So thank you so much for making the time to come along. Hopefully you've heard lots of really interesting things that you can take away. And we're just going to go into a panel discussion, which is how to practically implement responsible AI. So when we talk about AI, it can be very difficult to actually make it practical within your organization, which is what we'll be discussing. So I'm going to invite Trish, Mavis and Guy, if they can come on camera. I'm going to introduce them and then we're going to be chatting through a few different things. Fab. There they are. Great. I'm just going to introduce each person so you have a little bit of a background and then we'll get straight into the questions. So I'll start with Guy. So Guy runs Charisma Entertainment, which uses advanced machine learning with creative artificial intelligence. He's worked on award-winning interactive entertainment products and has produced Emmy and BAFTA nominated products for drama and factual television series. He's worked with Warner Brothers, Sky and the BBC, and he's also on the UK 5G Creative Industries Working Group, on the board of multi-award-winning tech art company Blast Theory, and a co-founder of the Collaborative AI Consortium. So a massive welcome to Guy. Really excited to have you here. I'm going to go over to Mavis next. So Mavis is a senior researcher at the Ada Lovelace Institute. Excuse me. She's leading on the Health and COVID-19 Technologies Programme. She works on data-driven and genomic technologies, legacies on society and their impacts on health and social inequalities. She's got a PhD in health studies research from King's College and has since worked on many research projects. She was previously a member of the World Economic Forum Future Council on Biotechnology and is a current visiting researcher at Newcastle University. She also has a lot of experience with a clinical background in midwifery and social research. Massive welcome, Mavis. Thank you so much for coming. And lastly, but not least, is Trish. So Trish is from Beyond Research Consulting, which is based in the UK. She advises internationally on AI and data ethics, policy, governance, and corporate digital responsibility. She's got over 20 years experience as a lawyer in data technology and regulatory government affairs, and is a registered solicitor in England and the Republic of Ireland. She's authored and edited many works on law and regulation, policy, ethics and AI. She's on the Digital Catapult Ethics Committee along with Mavis, and we're really excited to have her here as well. So a massive welcome. Thank you everyone for coming. So the first question is quite a big question, but I'm going to go to all the different panel members for this one, each individually. So first of all, what do you think is the biggest misconception about technology ethics? And I'm going to start with Mavis, if that's all right.
Yeah, thank you. So I think one of the biggest things is that ethics is boring, and ethicists want to stop you doing your work and putting your products out. I don't think this is true at all. I wonder if some of this comes from the idea that ethics is something that you do at the end of your design process. So if that's what happens, and if that's your idea of ethics, of I've got this great product, I've created it and it's ready to market, now let me go talk to some ethicists, you're more likely to get those, have you thought about this, and maybe you shouldn't go ahead with this product that you've already designed. But if you start to embed ethics, not just in thinking about the design, but even in the question that you want to ask, and then have those questions kind of reflexively along the way with people who already work in ethics or who are thinking about ethics, then by the time you get to deploying your product, you're less likely to get someone to say, oh, actually don't do that, because you've already been responding to the questions that would have arisen at the end. So I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that ethicists are just there to stop good things happening in the world. And that's true at all.
No, I definitely couldn't agree more. It's so important to kind of build it from the foundations rather than that kind of afterthought. Guy, what are your thoughts around this?
Well, I think I agree with that. I think we've got to look at this from the very beginning and think about it. Actually, that's probably the most important thing, is just to acknowledge that that it needs to be thought about, because if you start from the point that you're embedding it into your thinking in product design or in a project or whatever you do, then you are going to be setting off down a pathway that you need to be on. If you don't think about it, then there is no pathway, there is no map, and you're going to bump into all sorts of problems, largely, and echoing a little bit of what was said before, where data sets are chosen or technology strategies are set that do not consider tech responsibility and ethics to be something that is important. So we felt, and I'll post a link to this in a second in the chat, but when we were building Charisma very early on, we wanted to have something that was representative of humankind in it, not representative of Twitter, Firehose, or Reddit or something, which is not representative of humankind as a data set. And so we partnered with King's College London and the Canadian government to write a paper on unconscious bias in AI data sets, which back in 2018, like people weren't really thinking about, and even now comes across as a bit dry. But when that data set is powering stories or powering conversations from digital humans or whatever it may be, it becomes really important. So I think I totally agree with everything Mavis has said on this. I think that from my perspective as a small business owner, I would like the investment community to increase their due diligence on ethics when they're looking at AI companies. The speed to profitability is always a key thing, but if you're speeding off in the wrong direction, that's not a good thing. So I would like that would be my call out to the industry is to have a little bit more of a due diligence around the ethics around the technology and the data sets that you used.
Yeah, definitely. And Trish, what are your thoughts around kind of misconceptions around tech ethics?
So I think it's got to start with the fact that many people think complying with the law is being ethically compliant, and so long as you're legally compliant, that somehow you are mitigating that risk. And I think that's a really big misconception, because you can be legally compliant, yet your business or your business models, as we've seen across the world with some of the big platform providers, can still not be wholly ethical and have adverse unintended outcomes. So that's kind of one tenet of this, and the biggest misconception I find. But also the other tenet is that tech ethics is simply not needed for BAU, for business as usual, and is as a result, it's subsequently left to be at the wayside as an afterthought, and it's not put up front and central, which it really ought to be and should be, for the very reasons that both Mavis and Guy have pointed out. It is not simply just a nice to have. And I think that can be some of the part of the conversation. It's like, let's get our product to market, let's get our return on investment, let's think about that later. That's an adjunct, not the core business. And I think some of the other barriers to the thoughts about technological and technology ethics can be that it's too costly to implement, that there's, it's a big cost burden that we really can't afford to bear right now, especially as a startup, especially as an SME. And I think these are real kind of misconceptions that can be easily overcome once you've started to implement it. If you've started from the get-go, implement it, bring it into your culture from the get-go, that actually the financial burden's amortized, if you like.
Definitely. So making sure that it's not a kind of tick box exercise, but it's kind of right from the roots of foundations. I suppose kind of drawing on a lot of your expertise within the law, Trish, what do you see the kind of relationship between tech ethics, regulation and the standards within the current European context? Because obviously we hear a lot going on with regards to regulation. China's just working on their regulation at the moment. With regards to the European context, what's that look like for you?
So I think first and foremost, just leading on really from the last question into this one, is that because there hasn't been any regulation, that there hasn't been any law so far, there hasn't been that regulatory impetus for people to actually implement the tech ethics. So yeah, I suppose it's kind of a bit chicken and eggish in that way. But from my perspective and how the law is, and particularly an EU stance, because the EU has been very brave and bold in looking to implement the AI Act, that it's going through its process, the parliamentary process at the moment, it is having that Brussels effect, as we're seeing both in the US, in Japan, in Singapore, and as you rightly pointed out, in more recently in China. And I think India won't be too far behind as well. But how this ethics journey becomes that law is ethics is about framing, really. It brings context to every law. And I think before every law has ever existed, there's been some kind of societal issue, something that had to be considered unethical, particularly at that time, where law was needed and was appropriate to kind of guide and perhaps engender specific societal behaviours, and that then led to the inception of new law. And I will take a prime example of driver safety, driver and passenger safety. So for many years, people drove around without a seatbelt on, particularly in the front seats, and then that suddenly became the back seats as well. So we see that no one thinks, even bats an eyelid about wearing seatbelts anymore, particularly when you're in a vehicle, certainly in Europe. But that's where also technological innovation can be a real source of helping to respond to ethical issues as well. We've heard about the kind of examples of curb cuts in pavements that were originally used for to help disabled pedestrians, but these are really helpful for parents and carers with prams and buggies, as well as cyclists and skateboarders. Another technological innovation that has been kind of moved into a place that can be useful and have ethical outcomes is SMS text messaging. This was used for in military context originally, but then was used to communicate, or can be used to communicate, with someone who's deaf, or with a screen reader for someone who's blind. And then it's also a rather convenient way to talk to someone halfway around the world, where you haven't you're not in the right time zone for a phone call, or you don't really want to have a full phone call. So there's lots of both law innovation and tech innovation that's been brought into space. So what we're seeing in Europe, and where ethics has been really grounding the law, is the great work of the EU high-level expert group. They really took the bull by the horns and said, what are the key ethical issues we need to address, both in the data and how it's modeled, and how then we bring about the algorithmic system, how we look at people and the diversity and inclusivity of people. And then also they address some of the idea of sustainability and in terms of environmental impact as well. And this was all done prior to the proposal for a risk-based piece of legislation. So I think this is a really important journey that we're on as part of Europe, and as also other countries surrounding Europe, in the UK where I'm based. And what that has then gone on to do is to help identify the determinants of what is unacceptable risk, so high-level AI, high-level risk AI, or low-level acceptable risk AI, such as things like chatbots and the like. And these, at the moment, have been codified in the proposed law. And so to that degree, what the law is doing and seeking to set out is a foundation of what is ethical and unethical, or what they coined as trustworthy AI. And it's through that law is seeking to put in place steps that organisations ought to be doing to help them realise that trustworthy AI, like putting risk management in place, like putting governance in place, putting quality management structures in place, making sure you've got standards and certification. And so I think that's where standard certification, and I will dare say also audit, become really powerful tools in operationalising and assessing trustworthy AI. So you want to do it ex ante before it goes out the door, and post operation, post facto, so that you're not only saying, well, this is what I've done, now here's what I can evidence and record keep to show you my decisions and what I've done to get this out the door. But then when it's out the door and operational, how are you monitoring this? How are you making sure that, particularly when it's a dynamic tool like machine learning and it's constantly changing, how are you keeping on top of that from an ethical stance? How are you ensuring its legal consequences are abated, but also its ethical consequences are being mitigated as well? And so I think that there's real opportunities, and this is what makes this new piece of law so much more rich, I think, that it's taken all of that into account. And then that's brought about a whole embodiment of different kinds of standards bodies that are looking to kind of support and bring guidance, recommended practices, process methodologies and the likes to flesh out these ethical concepts in relation to how AI and AI ethics are practiced and responsible AI is brought about. So we're seeing this with the IEEE, we're seeing this with the ISO, we're seeing this with Senelec. So a number of them are looking about, the whole life cycle, looking at accountability, privacy, transparency, all number of other algorithmic bias, of which I'm also a part of as well. So I am biased because I'm also involved with some of these standards making bodies, but I think these are ultra helpful for any organisation wanting to implement responsible AI in their tech and bring it into their culture, because governance also is absolutely core to this. And it's all about building trust. It's not about trust per se in the AI, it's about trust in the people that make that organisation, because as has already been said, people are biased. We're at the core of this, and we need diverse and inclusive approaches to this, and that's one of them. I think just to bring it to a conclusion here on this one, I think what some of the challenges of this new AI Act and other acts around the world, and also standards, will be for SMEs and startups, is that the way that the law is proposing that you need structures in place and requiring you to implement certain standards in your organisation. This can actually be, one, a financial barrier for startups, because that might just be a cost too far for them. But two, this might have practical implications, because they might just simply not have the resource, capacity or competence, you know, in a 3-person organisation to a 20-person organisation to a 200-person organisation. You know, there are big differentials there as to whether or not you can implement the appropriate risk management, quality management, and indeed go and put the resource and time and effort into getting standards ready, so to speak. So I think that as a result, for startups in Europe, I think that there is going to be a real decision to be had, and I'm hoping that the EU regulators take this on board at the moment, is to think about, you know, how will this impact startups and SMEs? Do they want to relegate them to simply the innovation R&D space, or do they want to see these smaller agile businesses that are likely to have a better future eye on the ball and not kind of be stuck in their legacy, to actually put their AI, get their return on investment, bring it into the marketplace, put it into service themselves? So I think there's a real challenge for the law, challenge for standards, challenge for startups in that, and SMEs. And I think that also poses a little bit of a challenge for them to get their own return on investment, back to the point that Guy made earlier on.
Great, thanks for that, Trish. That's a lot of food for thought. I think something so important that you said is about the journey. So the governments are on a journey, SMEs are on journeys, and it's kind of taking that iterative approach with all these different things, as your products will grow as well and they will change, and kind of making sure that you're flexible, you're agile along that process. So yeah, thank you so much for that. I suppose we've spoken quite a lot about why SMEs should be thinking about this, how they should be thinking about this. I suppose, Guy, from your experience working for a startup, what do you see as some of the biggest benefits of kind of applying tech ethics?
So for us, I think it's just part of who we are, actually. I think there are 2 ways to approach this. One, as a sort of big concept. One is through establishing the principles, and the other one is so with the carrot, you know, this is what you should do. And then the other one with the stick, which is the regulation of like, don't do this. And for us, I think we have wanted to explore the principles first. So what can we do? Because again, like that pathway I was talking about before, it sets us down a particular pathway that we can feel positive about, rather than the human nature of trying to break the rules that are put in front of us, or at least game with them a bit. So I think for us, what it does is that it's not so much that we are you know, putting anything like this up on the pedestal. It's just simply something we feel we should do, and it's something and is part of who we are as a company, and it is part of, I suppose, our general modus operandi as a company that applies similar characteristics and similar ethics to, you know, our employment, to the projects we do, to the themes we put into our games and everything. So my sense is that I think it can be a bit scary for people, because AI can be a bit scary, and you know, technology can be a bit scary, and indeed ethics can be a bit scary. But I think as long as we're, as I was saying before, as long as we're thinking about it and we're encouraging other people to think, hey, you should just, you know, just question where your data's from, you know, read your data crazily. You know, when we first started Charisma, I read, you know, a lot of the data that we were training our model on, because I was curious and I wanted to see, and I made changes to it because I didn't feel that it was training it in the right way. So I think it really goes back to something very simple, which is just to think about it and to incorporate it into your business, as we do now with GDPR and various other things. But that's my approach to it, is simplified, keep it simple.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's very much kind of the thread of your organization. It's really kind of woven into kind of how you work, your day-to-day, how you interact with one another. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Trish and Mavis, do you have any thoughts on this in terms of what some of the biggest benefits of doing tech ethics for startups are? Mavis, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest benefits is it depends on which lens you want to look at it, right? There's the lens of kind of capitalism. You go into startups, some people to make money. And actually, if you do it right, then you're probably going to profit. But I think there's another lens which is really important, which is about making sure that your product actually doesn't cause harm to society. And whether this is intent, like most people go into these kinds of works not to do harm intentionally, but there are always these unintended consequences. So I think one of the biggest benefits is just making sure that you don't then go down the road of unintended consequences because you didn't think about, for instance, what I was saying, like, what is the model being trained on? What kind of data is it? And also, I think it's a way to make sure that your work, sometimes, you know, there are all these kind of conversations that are happening in society about disability and gender and equality. I think your work actually responds to that in a way. So you can choose in one way to ignore all of those societal concerns. And if you do that as part of like not thinking about ethics, what your product will do is impact negatively on all of those conversations. So it's also a way to think about your position as a just organization and how you contribute to issues of fairness and equality within society.
Yeah, definitely. Trish, did you want to add anything with this one?
I would wholeheartedly agree. I think from kind of an economic perspective, this gives people competitive advantage, I actually think, because not only is it helping you to manage your risk by reducing that harm very clearly that Mavis and others have said in this conversation today, but also I think this is a real opportunity to engage with your stakeholders, engage with your customers, and get that dynamic feedback. So you are listening, you're in listening mode, you're in growth mode, growth mindset mode, and actually having an opportunity to innovate. So listen to that, respond, be agile, and change and adapt the product in a more swift manner, perhaps more swiftly than some of your bigger competitors.
Definitely. I think especially with some of the kind of chatbots that Microsoft came out with on Twitter and put all that money into, and then it was suddenly being really sexist, really homophobic, like within a few hours, and they'd spent all that money, so all that economic waste as well. So that was a really interesting one. I suppose, Mavis, you've already kind of touched upon this, but how important is diversity and inclusion when we are having conversations about tech ethics?
I think it's hugely important, right? And it takes so many different angles. So there's kind of designing for the community that you want to design for, but how are you going to know what that community is? A lot of the times, same as in research, it's always kind of been designed for a particular kind of person, and the kind of standard has been the, I guess, straight white male of a certain age. But actually, if the products are going to be used on pregnant people or on children, already there's a discrepancy there. So when you're thinking about kind of inclusive work, diversity and inclusion is really important. And it's not just about kind of who sits in your organization, right? So if you have an organization of 4 people, you may not be able to obviously represent the community that you're going to be designing for, but how else can you have those conversations? Well, there are many organizations where people are kind of very willing to have conversations about, well, what are you designing for? Go to disability groups, go to feminist organizations, go to like this. You can pick and choose. You can close your eyes, pick an organization in society and go and talk to them about, this is what I want to design for. This is the technology that I want to put out for. The question that they'll probably ask you is, well, what is the benefit that you see in designing for that? And from there, you can start to think about the assumptions that you've made about the kind of society that you think you're designing for, because sometimes there is that discrepancy between what you think the world needs and what those people in the world actually need. So diversity and inclusion, sometimes people think about it as let's get representation of society on our boards, but it's not really about that. It's more about differences and experiences that people bring that are beyond kind of what they look like. You really want to make sure that the ways in which people go through society and experience the different kind of societal issues are reflected in then the ways that you're designing products. It's also, like I said, it's not removed from society, but it's also about kind of thinking beyond then where your products are going, but what the input is. So again, as has been said by others, is where's your data coming from, right? So you can be diverse in terms of the people that you bring in to understand your data sets, but you might not be inclusive in the terms of who benefits from that work. So it's a two-way, like actually like on multiple levels, it's a two-way process. So you don't want to be extractive. There has to be kind of a feedback loop. So if you're designing for people, who am I designing for? And are those people represented then in either the inputs and the outputs? And if they're not, then there's a way that you need to be kind of reconfiguring your work. So it is really important, but it's also kind of questioning, what do you mean by diversity? What do you mean by inclusion? Because if you don't question those concepts, it's just going to be tokenistic practice.
Definitely. I think that's so vital, because we hear so much about kind of EDI. And I think especially when you're a small startup and say, yeah, but I've only got 2 people or 3 people in my organization. How am I ever going to be, like, as you said, kind of representing all the different communities that we want to engage with? But it's very much about engaging communities, understanding your users, being empathetic. Yeah, that's so important. I suppose a question.
Can I just jump into that, because I think that there was a key word there that Mavis said, which was the product. And if you've got 3 people in the company, you may not, it's going to, as she said, it's going to be really hard to, cover a broad range of views and voices in that. But you can in the product, if you think about it. And if you're building a product, that's where you can make the difference. You may not be able to make the difference in, diversity of your board or your framework or whatever, simply on a numbers game, but you can in the product. And that's where I think if the product is then what is reaching the audiences, hopefully if you're successful it is. And as you mentioned, Microsoft's Tay, that was a moment where I think people realized what happens when things can go not so much out of control, but when they're not designed with this in mind. Then the product can run away. So I just echo that thinking about it in the product is a key place where people can think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if I could just add to that, I think it is about diversity and inclusion across the whole life cycle. So at design, development, deployment, ongoing monitoring, and then at decommissioning, because at some of this, you could actually be identifying where does the rubber really hit the road? Where is the friction point for my organization, for my product, regarding diversity, inclusion, and accessibility, I would add to that as well, at each of those points across the AI lifecycle. And I think we're seeing that with some of the open banking, open initiatives, open data, open finance, open wealth, all of this that we're seeing as well, and what that might do to a person digitally and financially, including them and excluding them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a really good point with regards to the life cycle. It's kind of what happens next, what happens with the iterations, how are we ensuring that this is kind of long term and not just, as we keep saying, not just a tick box exercise at the beginning. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Obviously, all of you come from quite different sectors. I suppose, how do you think the different sectors that you are all within shape the conversations that you're having about tech ethics? I suppose I'll start with you, Trish, if that's all right.
That's fine. So I kind of work in a couple of sectors, but finance is kind of one I've worked a lot of my years in. I spent 13 years working for what I call a global data company, but others might know as a credit reference agency. And whilst finance in and of itself is heavily regulated and actually has a bit of an eye on the ball really for ethics, in that one of the core principles, certainly here in the UK for financial services, is treating customers fairly. I think the challenge we have across the globe with ethical principles right now is, what does that mean? What does that mean in practice? We might have a taxonomy, a kind of a naming, a common definition, if you like, a common language in it, but we don't have necessarily what that means in practice in a particular culture, in a particular jurisdiction. So in terms of financial services context, we haven't got a specific strict definition of what fair means, but in being fair, safety, reliability, security, privacy, being accessible for vulnerable customers and not being discriminatory are kind of all implicit in that, and they are key. And I think that's where, for me, tech ethics has really hit the road, particularly, you know, with the vast speed at which digital transformation has happened, particularly over COVID for a lot of the banking and financial fintech services sector. And it brings into the conversation not only those aspects I've just mentioned, but really getting to think about what does financial inclusion look like when you can't access a bank on a high street anymore? What does financial inclusion mean when you don't have a smartphone and you're digitally excluded? What does financial inclusion mean when you don't have the data? You're a new to country entrant, you have migrated here, or simply you just don't have the credit profile or the data, and you can't verify your own identity. These are all barriers to you actually functioning fully in that social contract, because banks and the financial services sector is working on a social license to operate in this space, and through that this is like a ethical exchange. I want to have banking services, you provide me with banking services, but you can provide me those banking services so long as I can trust you. And if I think I can trust you, then I will engage with you more. And I think that's really pertinent to this. This is all about building trust. So for financial services in the tech ethics space, I think it's really important that they have a real understanding of needs and expectations and the kind of context of those who their products and services are intended for, and really getting to grips with the outcomes that that the people want to achieve in their own lives from this, and what's the real life impact for them. You know, by an algorithmic system saying you don't have the right credit score and saying no, you can't have this loan that's going to get you from one day to the next, or enable you to buy a new fridge or your freezer to replace what you've just lost, you know, that can have a damaging effect. Or if it prevents you from getting a transport so you can go to and fro from work in the olden days when people weren't working remotely, of course. And so there's a whole load of barriers. And actually for some people, you know, this can be destitution territory. This can be, I can't feed my family, I can't keep my house, I can't get rental accommodation, I can't pay my rent, I can't pay my council tax. So there's all of these barriers that we really need to think about. But it's not all negative.
Sorry, Trish. We've only got 1 minute left.
Oh,
so
gosh.
Sorry about that. If we could just bring Guy in for 30 seconds and then Davis kind of really, really quickly.
Thank
if that's
you.
all right. Thanks so much, Trish. Guy, yeah, just really quickly kind of.
I'd just say, don't be scared of it. You know, it's an important thing to do, and just as long as you're wondering about it in the decisions that one's making in business life, to as you're doing a pitch deck, as you are doing your product design, as you are choosing technologies, just think about it, you know, because usually there are options if you spend an extra 20 minutes researching them.
Perfect. Thank you for those final words, Guy. And Mavis, just a really quick one.
Is the question about advice?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, kind of don't be scared of it, but also talk to people, because those are your biggest assets. So you don't have to have a lot of money to invest. It doesn't have to be capital intensive, but talk to people, and this includes people that don't look like you, because in talking to people who don't look like you, in whichever sense that is, who have different experiences, who have such a different demographics, you're going to find the holes that are potentially in your work. Because as much as we like to think nobody starts with a perfect product, but in talking to people, you can kind of move towards something that is what marks up.
Great, fantastic. Thank you so much, all of you. It's been brilliant. Really, really interesting answers. Thank you again. If you could all just go off camera and mute, and I will hand back to the wonderful Nathan. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thanks, Cecilia, and all the panel members and all our speakers today. It's been a fascinating event, and thank you, everyone, for attending. The webinar was recorded, so we'll be kind of sending that out to people who registered to the event and putting it on our Digital Catapult YouTube channel. So yeah, again, thank you very much for everyone's contributions, and also thank you for the questions from the audience. So have a good day, and yeah, take care.